question. It's been a wonderful day. And there've been some really exciting examples in the room. They're clearly all connected to each other. But I'm wondering if ex-voto is the best overarching concept for all of the things we've discussed. This is particularly clear to me as Suzanne Blier was talking, and some things were clearly ex-voto, but other things, channeling ancestral power into objects and people, struck me as things that are normally discussed under a rubric of animation, ensoulment, and I wondered if maybe the overarching is the material connect to entities not visibly present.
So the short answer is that the exhibition is about offering and not about ex-votos. I think the word ex-voto appears around 4 to 5 times in the catalog.
But even offering falls short for some of the things that were discussed here.
Absolutely. But you have to find a word to use that will be an overarching word, I think.
Okay,
I think that in case of the African material, and maybe Suzanne can say something about it, the relationship between the objects and the community, and more importantly, the things that the people give to these objects, and these are things that are mainly ephemeral and cannot be brought to the exhibition, make the entire process much more realized, so to speak. Suzanne, maybe you would like to intervene.
No one interferes. Go for it. I think that you've said it exactly right. It's that what is added to them is ephemeral, and all too frequently gets wiped off, gets cleansed from the works as they enter into Western collections. But it's no less important to their overall structure. I think the only other thing that I would add is that when you're doing research on a historical topic, largely by way of contemporary sources, meaning not written sources, the Western kind of canons and terms, etc., immediately fall by the wayside, and you're less prescribed by them. And whether you're dealing with art history or anthropology or economics or political issues, I think the complexity of the situation adds its own kind of patina to the work and to the topics at hand.
Okay, yes, please.
I would like to thank everyone for an excellent day. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and Mitchell Murbach, your presentation touched me deeply, because Simon of Trent and that cult out of Nuremberg even led easily to the slaughter of 6 million Jews. And thank you for bringing that to our attention.
You're welcome. I just want to point out that it's a very widely studied case. It's probably the most widely studied case of a medieval ritual murder cult that persists into the modern era, and actually created some copycat accusations in the 19th century, which were probably more instrumental in the modern anti-Semitism that you're referring to.
Diana Fain, please.
I just wanted to comment on your talk that in Mexico now and throughout much of Latin America, the priests are responsible for removing all the ex-votos. And especially in the 19th century, they tried to make special rooms, or you'll see a picture of one of them in the top floor, where these people are just hastily sketching these stories that what they want help with there, and that the priests are very embarrassed by all this. They also feel nervous about them skipping the priest so they're offering these pictures and very much believing, especially in the retablos, which are just representations of the saints, they have no intermediary religious, conversation with the priest, so they're left with nothing really to say. I mean, they don't go to to confession, and so they go to the retablos of the local saint that they totally believe in. And
Cynthia?
those retablos are also for the ones that are done independently outside the church, serve as models for the saints, and you'll find them very much copying the retablo images of the standing saint with paying no attention to the little supplicant next to them. But,
Thank you. Would you like to respond? Okay. Cynthia Han, please.
I was particularly interested by the notion of the economy of ex-votos and the exchange issues that came up in I know David Morgan probably was the most, and he's not here, but nonetheless the rest of you also brought it up. And the characterization of many of the ex-votos as valueless, which seems to be kind of intrinsic to a lot of the operation here. But when I think to medieval ex-votos that are really best preserved in texts, unfortunately, a lot of times they would insist that they would be wax or iron, and those would be reused. So they would enter into a cycle of use and yet somehow also be preserved. For example, at Sainte Foy, they are reused as the iron gratings around the cult image. What do is this valueless quality a modern thing, or is it important to earlier systems of ex-votos and other systems? That's just one.
Freddie, please.
One of the interesting things that I found out, or there was, that it's documented in the early 16th century, the priests would take some of these little paintings and they'd use them as bartering. So it was the same as dollars or whatever. I don't need dollars, but you get the idea. And they'd go to, they'd pay for goods like wine, wheat, bread, and at one site in Cesena, it had actually caused a real reprimand from higher
Why do they have value to other people?
That's a really, it does, the document that this is in does not say that. I think it has to be somehow that they absorbed some of this special healing, magical, just through touch, the tactile, and so that it was infused somehow.
But
That's
that
my guess.
also is very true in Mexico, for example. I first went in 1966, I guess it was, and we were at a big market in Monterrey, and they had stacks and stacks of these little tableaus and tin things. So I kept saying, well, I want to see them all or something. They say, well, what saint do you want? And it was totally about getting, they thought I wanted a saint for my own wall to talk to. But that wasn't what I was looking for at all. I was looking for a sort of effective or amusing picture, which, there was this huge range of ways in which they were represented. So we did buy several. It was true that Guadalupe was more expensive than any of the others.
John, maybe you can say something.
I think there are two aspects that I hope I touched on briefly this morning. Well, one was the essential worthlessness in economic terms of many of the offerings in a Buddhist setting, principally in South Asia, but it also occurs in early Brahmanical offerings of clay, moulded clay or modelled clay votives. They have no intrinsic value whatsoever. We know this historically because they survive in great numbers at archaeological sites, at places deemed sacred, and no one took them away. No one saw them as convertible into something useful. They were left to naturally decay and return to the earth again. So the merit, the value was in the act of making them. That was the spiritual merit that accrued to the practitioner, and the same if you look at. We have an object in the exhibition, a late medieval small stone stele of the 8 great events in the life of the Buddha. It has, as it was being installed, our enterprising curator discovered a paper scroll rolled up, tucked inside the base of it. and we sent a conservator over immediately to carefully remove the object, and sure enough, it had prayers or charms and spells, really, magical formulas written in Tibetan in a fairly modern ink and paper that have been added to this object, and undoubtedly replacing earlier ones that have been there since the making of the object in the 12th century. So that paper and ink had no value whatsoever, but the power of the word, the value was in the sacred word of the Buddha that was being invoked through that donation.
Thank you. Maria Lo?
Thank you for all these wonderful talks.
You have to speak up.
Okay, thank you again for all of these wonderful talks. I had a very specific question for Frederica Jacobs's discussion of St. Luke from earlier this morning. I was wondering if any of the material in terms of the history of apothecaries has come into use for your research. Because I was thinking about the apothecary as a place where both medics, physicians as well as artists converge, and the kind of shared properties of pigments and kind of natural raw resources that would have gone either into pigments for painting or into symbols for medicines.
That just reminds me, when you speak, it sort of relates, you mentioned the kind of falling off of that iconography of Saint. But of course, it does exist in a secular form as patron saints for artists, you know, so in that sense,
The St. Luke is most of when he's the painter.
Right.
He
Yeah.
does certainly survive. It's just as word, more importantly. Maria, I have not gone in to actually look into a lot about that. What I think I'm understanding, you're looking at that sort of the idea of transforming one sort of material into like another. Where are you? I'm not. I'm not sure. You know, I'm thinking about it, and more typically, what I found is that these things could be had in apothecary shops, but much more typical was the erection soon. Once a shrine was declared sacred and went through that almost immediately, really close by, I can't think of a time when it didn't happen, that workshops went up. And so that these things began to be not really produced and then given to a third. It's like we're cutting out the middleman. I mean, you don't have to go to the apothecary. All you have to do is walk in 500 feet into that store and buy it. And that's true at Viterbo. It was true at Lonigo. It was true at all of them. I mean, they went up. And that was another way, we're talking about the politics of who ran them and who got the used material. And I think one of the more well-known cases is the Madonna of Loreto. This business deal, for lack of a better way to put it, that went on between the wax, people who made things, candles and objects, figurative objects of wax, and the priests tending the interior of the shrine, because they were sweeping that shrine clean too. And so they would let candles only burn to a certain point, take the wax, get money, sell it to the shop, the child who would remake something, let it burn down again, take it back. You know, it was really quite a money making up.
Maria,
Just follow up very quickly. I'm sorry, I should have rephrased it slightly differently. What I was thinking about extends from my knowledge of Venetian apothecaries and pharmacies, because that was where you would find the materials for both pigments and medicines. So if you were a doctor or if you were a painter, you would go to the apothecary very often to buy pigments or the raw resources that could then be ground into, on one hand, pigments, or on the other hand, medicines. So I was thinking of that as a crossover for the two aspects of
It's an interesting idea. I haven't, other than, you don't see it too often. I mean, I can't think of many cases, but you usually, for example, in court cases where someone's brought before an inquisition for an abuse of this sort of thing, there's usually, they're not going through an apothecary to get objects, or they're going through individuals who seldom have a little shop and also go with trade fairs, which are geared to help.
Yep.
So I don't know. I have to think about that. But it's always your challenge. Thank you.
Last question, Renata Holland, you have a question?
Thank you very much for all your papers. There's a lot to think about. I was just trying to, if you want to look at my own field work in completely different locations, it seems to me that in all of these cases, what we're really dealing with is practices that are not, if you want, official. They're not condoned by the doctors of law or, the cleric, the high clerics. This is almost from the point of view of, popular practice and then down into who knows what else. I mean, magic. I'd like to offer up two other examples. One is working on the island of Djerba off the coast of Tunisia, where you would have a tree. The tree would get ex-votos, but these ex-votos are simply red ribbons that are tied to the tree. And of course, nobody collects them because at some point they're gone. But they are essentially a memory of the act of pleading for something.
Yeah.
And somebody just leaves, and the entire bush was simply covered with this. So we don't have them. In fact, you should actually have a fake tree with these red ribbons. Why red? Why red is the question, if you tell me why.
Sylvie want to comment to Renata, and then we have to move to Gerhard's concluding remarks.
This phenomenon
Yes.
with the red ribbons and a red rag
Yeah.
also occurs in Armenia and the Middle East and Turkey.
Everywhere, yeah.
And what I heard could be true. Red is a symbol of life. It's the color of blood. No, you don't like that? Okay.
But Sylvie, you're absolutely right. It exists together with locks as something that is
Locks.
everywhere. I won't say cross-culture because it's not cross-culture, it's just everywhere. And that's one of the things that actually drew us in the beginning to this project, right? This is something that is beyond religion or beneath religion or sideways from religion, sideways from authority, sideways from the institution that enables all people.
Except for Suzanne.
Except
Except for Suzanne, she stands out as being the one place where it's integrated with.
Well, that's why.
And religion, and I think that's really, really interesting.
That's why Africa is much more interesting. Thank you very much for the questions and answers. I'm very happy to welcome Gerhard.